Welcome back students. I am your SST teacher Vandana Joshi and you are watching SST June. Students, in the previous video of the chapter, The Making of the National Movement, we have studied about the feelings of the nationalism, how these feelings came in the heart of the Indian people and how the movements took place in the history. We have studied about the many movements during that time, in which we have also studied about the Gandhian era. Students, the Gandhian era was a milestone in the Indian history to send out the Britishers from our country with two weapons, Satyagraha and Ahimsa. Bapuji removed all the Britishers from our country. But there were many revolutionary and many more movements were done by more people and also by Gandhiji. So let's see what were the movements and who were other people those took part in the nationalist movement. Students, when Gandhiji were in prison, during the time many revolutionary movements were in progress. The Krantikaris or the revolutionaries, they did a lot of work on the independence of our country. I think so you remembered about Sardar Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad and Subhash Chandra Bose. You have listened a lot of stories about that. In today's video, we are going to study about these revolutionaries and also we will cover our two more topics in today's video. These are about the Dandi March and the Quit India movement. So our today's topics are the Dandi March and the Quit India movement and after. The Quit India movement is not only the last, but many more things were there about which we are going to discuss in our today's video. So let's start our today's chapter. Students, when Gandhiji were in exile during that time in 1924, Ram Prasad Bismil, Jogesh Chatterjee and Sachin Sanyal, they formed a Hindustan Republic Association as they were followed a radical or extremist way, so their movements were a little bit violent. So on 8th of April 1929, Bhagat Singh and B.K. Dutt, they threw a bomb in the Central Legislative Assembly of British, not to kill or injure to anyone, but to make an alarm for the Britishers if they will not quit the India, so the results may be more deteriorating as compared to this bomb. But as a result, they both were arrested and sentenced life imprisonment. Then later, after that, a case hearing, Bhagat Singh found the responsible for the Lahore conspiracy case, in which they robbed and killed many people. That was a case done by the Britisher against Bhagat Singh, and he was sanctioned that. Then what happened in the history? How the people got angry and what were the later movement after that? Let's see. So after that, in 1930, a salt march or we can say the Dandi March was started. In 1929, Congress session, in that a Purna Swaraj revolution was passed. Because the demand of Purna Swaraj was raised from a very long time, so in that when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru decided on 26 January 1930, it will be observed Independence Day for India. So then after that a Purna Swaraj was declared, and after that the British government started many kind of suppresses in different part of the country. But then after that, the revolutionaries raised again their voice. In that scene, now the British government started an act which is known as the Salt Act. And in that, as we know, the salt is an essential need for the human beings. But there was a tax which had to be paid by the Indians on the salt. As everything which was beneficial for the British government, they started to make a kind of tax and the export and import on that things. And also, if anybody will use the things which are the necessary things, so in that also the Indians have to pay a kind of tax. So for against this salt law, the march was started by Gandhiji. That march was known as Salt March. So in March 12, 1930, Gandhiji started a historical salt march from his ashram in Sabarmati in Ahmedabad to Dandi, a village on western sea coast of India, with 78 other members of his ashram. But later the march was included by more and more people, and it was a great march to Dandi. He is also famous for once again ahimsa and use of truth's power by Gandhiji. So let's see more about the Dandi March in detail with the help of some videos. After the starting of movement, which is known as the Dandi March, they reached Dandi on April 6th, covering over 240 miles on foot, and picked up a handful of salt. By gathering natural salt on the seashore, they broke a salt law which was brought by the British government. Salt was such a commodity which was consumed by the rich and poor alike. Means it is essential by the poor as well as the rich. This started the civil disobedience movement under the leadership of Gandhiji. So after the Salt March, there will be a civil disobedience movement also. Okay, so the Gandhiji has a record of mass movement with the demand of Poon Swaraj. So students, there were a lots of movement, but no one movement as much popular as the movements were popular by Gandhiji, especially the Dandi March and the civil disobedience movement. Then after that, the success of the movement made the British realize the need of negotiated with the Indians. The British government had to hold the first round table conference in London in November 1930, but the Congress did not attend it. Only the Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha, and the representative of the Indian Prince participated. Since the Congress was the most important national organization, and without this participation, the conference became a failure. This resulted in the Gandhi-Irwin Pact in 1931. Gandhi-Irwin Pact, especially it is came after the breaking of the Salt Law. So, what is the Gandhi-Irwin Pact? Let's see. According to this pact, the government agreed to release all political prisoners against whom there were no charge of violence. Gandhiji decided to attend the second roundtable conference held in London in 1931. As the second roundtable conference did not fulfill Gandhiji's demand, he resumed the civil disobedience movement, which was finally suspended in 1934. Then what happened after that? In 1935, the Government of India Act made the provision of provincial autonomy. In 1937, elections to the provincial legislature was announced. In 7 out of 11 provinces, the Congress framed government. In 1939, the World War II broke out, and the Congress did extend its support to the British. But in return, they wanted the British to grant independence. Means the Congress want to support to the British, but in return Congress want the independence of our country. The Congress ministers resigned in protest as the British refused their demand. Already I told you that after the Dandi March, the Second World War was started. And then after that, when the Britishers don't want to support to the Indian, and as the Congress demanded, if the Congress will favor to the British government, then against of that, in return the Congress asked about the independence of the Indian, which was refused by the Britisher. Then after that, Gandhiji started a movement against the Britisher, and that movement was as much famous as the Dandi March. The movement was known as the Quit India movement, in which Gandhiji has given a slogan that is known as Do or Die. So what was the Quit India movement? Let's see. On 8th August 1942, the All India Congress Committee at a meeting in Bombay passed a resolution. This resolution declared that the immediate ending of the British rule in India was an urgent necessity for the sake of Indian and for the success of the cause of freedom and democracy, for which the resolution approved the starting of the great mass struggle which is popular as the Quit India movement. Gandhiji addressed the meeting in these words: "There is a mantra, a short one that I give you. You imprint it in your heart and let every breath of yours give an expression to it. The mantra is do or die. We shall either be free or die in the attempt." The movement spread despite the fact that Gandhiji and other leaders were arrested. In many areas, people set up their own government, symbols of authority were attacked. Nevertheless, the movement spread quickly with all sections of people joining in. The British reacted through brutal repression. 90,000 people were arrested and over 1,000 people killed. Though the movement was suppressed, the British realized that they would have to give independence to India soon. Students, as the Dandi March was popular, but the Quit India movement was suppressed by the British. Why? Because there were a lots of reason behind that, but the most influenced reason was the unity of the country was divided into two religions. So let's see how it has possible. During the provincial elections of 1937, it seems to have convinced the League that Muslim may even go unrepresented. As always, the Congress party, in which the Hindus are more in the majority, so always the Muslim League, which was earlier a part of the Congress party but later they divided themselves from the party separately, then they were unrepresented in the elections. So after the elections of 1937, the Muslim League suggested the formation of a joint government in the United Provinces. So it was a demand by the Muslim League, but because earlier the Muslim League was always supporting to the Congress party, that they want a joint government in which both the party can make a government as in the United Provinces. But that demand was denied or refused by the Congress party. The Congress party rejection of the Muslim League's demand convinced them that they would have problem in a Hindu dominant. Means it was showing that the Muslims are not can be a leader. So it was according to the Congress party. So after that, what happened? then the scene of the parties is totally divided into different parts. That the Muslim League started to make their own provinces. Then after that, the League began viewing the Muslims as a separate nation from the Hindus. So in 1940, Muslim League passed a resolution which was for the demanding partition of a country and the creation of a Muslim state which is later known as Pakistan. So let's see more about it. After the end of World War II, the Labour Party came to power in England and they agreed to grant India independence in 1945. The British started negotiation with the Congress and the League for the Independence of India in March 1946. Stafford Crisp to examine the demands, but these suggestions failed to satisfy them. Finally, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, announced that India would become a free nation and a new state of Pakistan will be created along with a free India. The nationalist leaders reluctantly agreed to the partition in order to bring an end the terrible communal riots which broke out in the Calcutta and soon spread to other parts of country. Here a point is for notable, that is the announcement of partition of India. It was followed by more riots, particularly in the Punjab. In a few months, about 5 lakh people, Hindu and Muslim, were killed and millions became homeless. Such wanton killing of innocent people had never occurred in the history of India before. So after that, at midnight on August 15, 1947, India gained independence and Pakistan was created. Pakistan comprised West Punjab, East Bengal, Sindh and the north-west frontier provinces. The period immediately after the independence saw thousands of people getting killed, millions forced to leave their homes and reduced to the position of refugees. Thus, independence was an occasion of mixed emotion, joy of being independent from the British, sorrow of the partisan of the country. Students, here this chapter is complete. Here we have seen a lot of things and also learn that if we will not be united, then anybody can take over the rule of our country. So for that we have to be united always and we have to be worthy for our nation. Even the chapter is also saying us about the patriotism, in which it is telling about the nationalism. Here it is also showing always the violence not work. Sometimes the truth and the non-violence is effectable as compared to the violence. But if the voice is not listened after the non-violence, so sometimes the violence is also required. Many things our independence tell us. It is giving us a lot of story. It is telling us about a joy of independence and it is also telling us a sorrow of partition and the deaths of our friends and many more people. It is telling us a condition about the refugees and it is also saying a history of a glory of our country and also the decline of the British rule. So students, here this chapter is complete. In our next video, we will study what happened after the independence in our next chapter, which is the last chapter of history. So for that, keep watching SST June.